Hi, everybody. I'm not sure if you were there when I read this part, but so I'm going to just read this book to you now, just so you have it, just in case you missed class or you want to hear it again. I know you have the book, but this is on page 300 of your blue. Let me get it. Your blue Hoot Mifflin book, okay? And if you didn't get one, let me know. I can always leave one in the office for you. Anyway, here we go. So this is about meeting Chris Van Allsburg, and I told you a little bit about him. He's one of my favorite authors. And if you read books by Chris Van Allsburg, before you know that he writes mysterious stories that leave a lot for you to figure out. To help you, he provides clues through each book. In order to find the clues, you must read the story and look at all the pictures very carefully. He's a great artist. What things seem strange to you in The Stranger? What explanations can you find in the author's words and illustrations to explain these mysteries? Van Allsburg says that his stories usually start out with a simple picture or ideas. So, you artists out there, this could be your future. It almost seems like discovery, as if the story was always there, he says. A few elements I start out with are actually clues. If I figure out what they mean, I can discover the story that's waiting. It takes him about 7 months to write and draw a book from start to finish. So it's longer than we've been on lockdown. Okay, other books, The Polar Express, one of my faves. Jumanji, the original, like the original movie, one of my faves, but also the book's great. The Mysteries of Harris Burdick, which is one of my favorites, and Just a Dream, which I've read a couple of times, but you'll enjoy it. Okay, so let's see. So here's the cover. So if you find this book in the library, that's what the cover looks like. And the little strategy focus in this chapter was when the mysterious stranger arrives at the Bailey's house, unusual things begin to happen. And then monitor your reading. If something doesn't make sense, you should always go back and reread to make sure you understand. All right, I reread things lots of times because that's just how my brain works. Anyway, here he goes. It was the time of year the farmer Bailey liked best. When the summer turned into to fall, he whistled as he drove along. A cool breeze blew across his face through the truck's open window. Then it happened. There was a loud thump. Mr. Bailey jammed on his brakes. Oh no, he thought, I've hit a deer. But it wasn't a deer the farmer found lying on the road. It was a man. Mr. Bailey knelt down beside the still figure, fearing the worst. Then suddenly the man opened his eyes. He looked up with terror and jumped to his feet. He tried to run off, lost his balance, and fell down. He got up again, but this time the farmer took his arm and helped him to the truck. Mr. Bailey drove. He helped the stranger inside, where Mrs. Bailey made him comfortable on the parlor sofa. And I've told you before, the parlor is like the living room or the fancy room of your house where you have guests. Katie, their daughter, peeked into the room. The man on the sofa was dressed in odd, rough leather clothing. He heard her father whisper, "Must be some kind of hermit sort of fellow who lives alone in the woods." The stranger didn't seem to understand the question Mr. Bailey asked him. "I don't think," whispered Mrs. Bailey, "he knows how to talk." Mr. Bailey called the doctor, who came and listened to the stranger's heart, felt his bones, looked in his eyes, and took his temperature. He decided that the man had lost his memory. There was a bump on the back of his head. In a few days, the doctor said, he should remember who he is and where he's from. Mrs. Bailey stopped the doctor as he left the house. He'd forgotten his thermometer. "Oh, you can throw that out," he answered. "It's broken. The mercury is stuck at the bottom." And that must be Katie right there in that picture. Mr. Bailey lent the stranger some clean clothes. The fellow seemed confused about buttonholes and buttons. In the evening, he joined the Baileys for dinner. The steam that rose from the hot food fascinated him. He watched Katie take a spoonful of soup and blow gently across it. Then he did exactly the same. Mrs. Bailey shivered. "Brr," she said. "There's a draft in here tonight." The next morning Katie watched the stranger from her bedroom window. He walked across the yard toward two rabbits. Instead of running into the woods, the rabbits took a hop in his direction. He picked one of them up and stroked their ears and set it down. The rabbit hopped away, then stopped and looked back as if they expected the stranger to follow. When Katie's father went into the field that day, the stranger shyly tagged along. Mr. Bailey gave him a pitchfork, and with a little practice he learned to use it well. They worked hard. Occasionally Mr. Bailey would have to stop and rest, but the stranger never tired. He didn't even sweat. That evening Katie sat with the stranger watching the setting sun. High above them a flock of geese in perfect V formation flew south on a trip that they made every fall. The stranger could not take his eyes off the birds. He stared at them like a man who'd been hypnotized. 2 weeks passed and the stranger still couldn't not remember who he was. But the Baileys didn't mind. They liked having the stranger around. He had become one of the family. Day by day he'd grown less timid. He seemed so happy to be around us, Mr. Bailey said to his wife. It's hard to believe he's a hermit. Another week passed. Farmer Bailey could not help noticing how peculiar the weather had been. Not long ago it seemed that autumn was just around the corner, but now it was still felt like summer, as if the seasons couldn't change. The warm days made the pumpkins grow larger than ever. The leaves on the trees were as green as they'd been 3 weeks before. One day the stranger climbed the highest hill on the Bailey farm. He looked to the road and saw a puzzling sight. The trees in the distance were bright red and orange, but the trees to the south, like those in the Baileys, were nothing but shades of green. They seemed so drab and ugly to the stranger. He would be much better, he thought, if all the trees could be red and orange. Huh. The stranger's feelings grew stronger the next day. He couldn't look at the tree's green leaves without sensing that something was terribly wrong. The more he thought about it, the more upset he became, until finally he could think of nothing else. He ran to the tree and pulled off a leaf. He held it in his trembling hand and, without thinking, blew on it with all his might. At dinner that evening the stranger appeared dressed in his old leather clothes. By the tears in his eyes, Bailey's could tell that their friend had decided to leave. He hugged them all once, then dashed out the door. The Baileys hurried outside to wave goodbye, but the stranger had disappeared. The air had turned cold, and the leaves on the trees were no longer green. Hmm. Every autumn since the stranger's visit, the same thing happens at the Bailey farm. The trees that surround it stay green for a week after the trees to the north have turned. Then overnight they change their color to the brightest of any trees around. And etched in frost on the farmhouse windows are the words that simply say, "See you next fall." Okay, so that's a short story, but a quick read. So, on your 2 column notes, we're going to continue to build on this stranger's character traits. We could talk about the internal, the inside, and the external, the outside. And then, one of the questions I want you to think is, who do you think the stranger is? And I'm going to ask you to tell me clues because, like I told you, Chris Van Allsburg always leaves clues when he's writing. So think about that, and we'll talk about it in class if we didn't talk about it today, but it's going to be part of your assignment. Anyway, it was nice reading the story to you. I will see you soon. Bye.